My audio, my video is really, oh, there we go. There we go. We're live. We're ready. Boop, 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 boop. What's up? I'm Austin Griffith. It's Bowtie Friday, kind of. This is kind of a Bowtie Friday. Usually we do like a Bowtie Friday thing where I shill things and I bring on guests. We have Matt Cutler here today from Block Native, the man from the mempool, the man who's knows what's going on Onchain. And that's, I think, what we want to do. Just like a quick little session. Matt, you tell us what the heck is going on Onchain. We just had a fork. We just had some blobs. What does it mean? I'll kick your mic off too. Careful with the mute. Yeah. There we go. We got you.
Awesome. Thanks for everybody for being here. So what's going on chains? Blobs. That's the big hotness. So we just had a hard fork. Dencun introduced this whole new way of transacting called type 3 blobs. And they were just kind of percolating along for a while, basically free for all intents and purposes, everything operating nominally. And then yesterday, everything went a little bit haywire with the advent of blobscriptions, basically inscriptions in blob space. The blob fees spiked, traffic exploded. It was all over everything. We were monitoring it quite closely. Our dashboard shows this stuff live. Since yesterday, it's returned kind of to a nominal state, but not anywhere close to what it was before. And just for perspective, the blob price was one way, which is the lowest it could possibly be. And in the course of a few hours, it went to over 80 gwei. Now, 1 to 80 does not sound like a lot, but way to gwei.
80 billion. Yeah.
That's a billion. Yeah. So it's sort of hard to contextualize sort of just how dramatic a change this has been and what it does to fees and the economics. And so that's kind of what we're paying a lot of attention to on Ethereum, and happy to sort of showcase some of what's going on, both what's happening right now and some dashboards about what happened over the past 24 hours.
So there's two things I want to talk about. I want to talk about price and how it was super cheap to deploy a smart contract. And then I want to talk about blobs and you mentioned these 3 different states of the network. Could you go into that real quick off camera? You mentioned it. I want to make sure we get it live. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So we at Block Native really focus on what's happening right now. And what we have observed, we've been doing, this type of work for 6 years now in the Ethereum ecosystem, is that Ethereum tends to operate in one of 3 states, right? The first state is the normal or nominal state. So everything operating smoothly, gas prices move a little bit, but it's kind of steady as she goes. And then there are congestion events. And congestion events is where there's a lot of surge in demand. And so yesterday we saw our first congestion event post Dencun, and it was very specifically a blob congestion event. We've never seen that before. And a whole bunch of interesting things happened.
Oh, we lost your mic for some reason. I don't know how that happened.
Here, I might need to switch. Could be a connection issue, but we'll still keep this as is.
Yep.
So yesterday was the first congestion event for blobs. We have not yet had a crisis event. So post Dencun. So crisis events are when there's generally a massive surge in prices. Typically, the price of ETH collapses. Everybody rushes for the exits. They have to defend positions. They have to unwind things, and the network gets kind of wedged, right? And so we have not seen one of those post Dencun yet, but we have seen our first now congestion event, which kind of tells us what might happen under a crisis situation. And so the history of the chain tells us more congestion events are coming, and probably some crisis events are coming too. And so if you're an actor on the network who needs to make sure you can transact reliably, now is the time to start preparing for these non-nominal situations. So anyways, interesting times.
It's interesting. So you're calling it a crisis event, but this guy right here is still chugging along, making blocks, right? So it may be a crisis event in terms of it's $20, $50, $100 to swap on mainnet or something like that. But the network still continues. Is there ever a moment when you literally can't put something on chain? It's just expensive.
So this is the definition of crisis. So congestion events are things get expensive, it gets tricky, there's contention, things aren't operating quite as smoothly as they normally do, right? and that compares to crisis events where it's actually genuinely difficult to get on chain. That the chain continues to operate. The chain is producing blocks reliably. Though even yesterday during this congestion event, there were a spike in the number of missed slots, which they're still sort of debugging, which missed slots means blocks aren't being produced, which means you can't get stuff on chain. And now that the network is sort of modular, i.e., much of the traffic is moving to these L2s, the L2s are leveraging blob space largely to post batches. Hey, guess what? Each block can contain a maximum of 6 blobs. So if all the L2s try to consume all the blob space all at once, there's only 6 chairs to sit in, right? That's not 6 transactions, that's 6 blobs, right? And so what starts to happen is this wedge where they all go for the same limited resource, right? And that resource is only available to a certain amount. And then guess what? Some will be able to get on, but most others will not. And then the queue starts to build. Okay, and this queuing phenomena is problematic because if you're an L2 that's trying to sequence transactions, you have this sort of real-time flow that includes your ability to post batches. If you can't post batches, then your batches start to stack up, and that throws off your sequencing, right? And so basically these sorts of states of the network where they go from nominal to congested to crisis requires specific mitigation strategies for each one of these actors to say, if things go seriously sideways, what are we going to do? Now, of course, you can revert to call data, which is generally more expensive than blobs, but recently, literally yesterday, there were moments where that wasn't the case. It was actually cheaper to post call data. There are other mechanisms of getting on chain as well. So anyways, it's just a long way of saying it was pretty interesting what happened yesterday. There was this giant surge in demand for blobs that created this huge spike in the blob base fee. It rivaled the L1 1559 base fee for the first time. Prices went up for everybody. There was a whole bunch of contention. Things got weird. Things have sort of stabilized since then and settled down, but that's where we are. And again, happy to show some of this stuff live so people can track this for themselves.
Let's pull up the dashboard in just a second. I just wanted to tell a story. I was so after 4844 is merged in, we had the hard fork like 10 days ago or something like that, maybe 15 days ago, something like that. Teams implemented it almost immediately. Within 4 or 5 hours, we saw L2s implementing it, and therefore, started to use this blob space, and fees on these L2s went way down. I deployed a smart contract at ETH Global London, and it was 2 cents on base, and that is like a magical experience. And I know it's not always going to be like that because we do have this like supply and demand type of market here, and when the demand goes up, the price goes up. And I think that's so relatively, maybe before 4844, I was able to deploy a smart contract for maybe like a couple of bucks on base, or maybe even maybe a little less than that. Then it went all the way down to 2 cents. But what did it cost even to just like move or a swap? What was a swap on base at the peak of this? Because the way the network works is it charges you relentlessly when it's congested, right? And you said it basically rivaled L1 maybe. So maybe like a $20 swap on. It looks like you've got something here on the thing. Would you like me to pull up the dashboard here?
Yeah, I'm looking at a specific dashboard because it's
Okay.
always a little bit tricky to do apples to apples, but
Okay.
certainly base in particular has been. Sorry, this is a Dune dashboard from Galaxy Research. That's really a very interesting one because it shows the economics of the impact of all of this stuff. And so here are the median fees on the L2s historically. So you can see this massive
drop. Yeah.
Fees as soon as Cancun goes live, but this dark blue line right here, that's base, right? And so you start to see the median transaction fee. Now, for a specific class of transaction, it'll be different, but what's happening in base is there's a lot of activity surging onto base, and base gets congested, and therefore base fees in the fees on base go up, and that's actually pretty well understood. Now, it's
base fees versus fees on base. That's a little tricky.
This is really fascinating, and this is not very well understood. Here we're looking at L2 transaction count. Now you notice here are fees over here dropped, but look at this
how
line.
base shoots up. Yes,
look at this
that's
line.
so awesome. That's exciting.
How is that possible? how does the fees drop and reflexively the transaction volume increases? And it turns out there's a very simple explanation for most of this, which is there is a whole class of arbitrage that in this regime is not profitable. And then as soon as the fees drop, it becomes profitable. And all these bots, which are just trying to seek profitable trades, start to fire off trades that they never would have done before because, hey, it costs $3, now it costs 3 cents. Guess what? There's a lot of arb right there. And so this is this natural law of when you change fees, basically you'll have new demand that surges in until things stabilize, right? And so there'll be this equilibrium that gets formed, and we're just in the period where fees have massively gone down and we're now trying to find a new equilibrium. The same is true, by the way, of blob fees as well. And so they were artificially low at the beginning because there wasn't a ton of demand. You know, this new source of supply opens up, not a lot of demand, fees very low. Give it, a couple of weeks. I think it was March 13th that Cancun hit. And hocus pocus, new forms of demand show up, blob prices go up. And I'm hearing from other developers about all sorts of interesting ways to leverage this new resource of blob space, right? So we had one resource before, which is block space. Now we have 2 resources, block space and blob space. They're not exactly the same. They have different characteristics to them, but they can be leveraged in arbitrary and permissionless ways. And guess what they are? Now to see what's going on live, this is Ether now. This is what we build. It says what's happening on Ethereum right now. Quite interesting. So the number of optimistic L2 transactions pending right at this very moment is 9,390 spread across 2 batches, which is pretty cool. But as we go down here, we can see how many blobs are pending. This is live, right? So at this very moment, there are 17 blobs that are marketable in the mempool. Though remember, only 6 get to the next block. And so what does that create? It creates this notion of blob contention, where blobs are competing with each other to get on chain. And we can see the blob base fee right now is currently 5 Gwei. But because it's 100% utilized, we can expect this number to go up. So basically, the base fee of blobs fee there just went up to 6, right? Because things were full. Now there's 0% blob utilization. Will come back down, and we can watch all this happen live. Now, what's fun is you can click through from here, and you can actually see this more sort of developer researcher-centric view of the public mempool on Ethereum mainnet. So we can see all of these blobs, and each one of these are not decoded. So this tells me these are all inscriptions, right? Here's a ZK validator, ZK sync time lock thing. You can see the blob. There's 2 blobs in here, right? As we go through, here's an Arbitrum sequencer. We decode the rollups themselves for the major optimistic rollups, including Optimism Base and Arbitrum. And we can actually go in here. It takes a little while because there's a lot of transactions. This is the big one that we saw before. And look, this one L3 transaction, which leveraged blobs, represents 4,519 transactions on the Arbitrum chain across 840 blocks, right? Super fascinating. And so we start to see, witness sort of this L2 scalability thesis play out in real time, and sort of how efficiently these resources start to get used. The economics, by the way, here's another dashboard. This one is from Flipside Crypto. It shows us historically, so we really specialize in real time. This is more historic stuff. What are the number of blobs posted? So here is the hard fork, right? Here we're chugging along, and then boom, you see this big pink spike. These are the inscriptions. But what's interesting, you'll notice there's this black happening here too. So this is a ZK rollup called Linea from the Consensus team. They recently started. They were a little bit later than everybody else to adopt blobs. They start to do it here, so you can see sort of which L2s, which actors are consuming blob space, and you can see this giant surge in inscription corresponds with the significant increase in fees, right? And so, by the way, here's the fees down here. They're 1 Gwei, which is much closer to free than anything else, right? We had been monitoring this for some time, and there were moments where it had gone up like 100% to 2 Gwei, and maybe even a 3 Gwei, which is still closer to free than anything else. Gwei, I mean, the smallest unit of measure. And as of yesterday, it's no longer free. We've gone from measuring in Gwei to measuring in Gwei. Again, a billion a time difference. And now that seems to be the new steady state. It's percolating along. We don't see that massive surge that we saw during the beginning of the inscriptions craze, but we do see all this stuff happening. And then this is the dashboard that I showed before from Galaxy on Dune. And this is really fascinating because it really goes into the economics here. So look at like L2 revenue, right? So these L2s actually internalize their fees, right? And so we look at like, what does the revenue look like? And then boom, we hit Cancun and suddenly their revenue spikes. So L2s love this. Their revenue's gone way up because their expenses have gone way down. But even still, it's pretty interesting. So if we look right here, these are the fees that these major L2s are paying to post to L1 with blob space. And they're about $30,000 a day, which is way less than it used to be. $30,000
a possible 2.5 million of revenue a day from a sequencer. Is that what I'm seeing here?
That's what this would indicate right here, right? This is across the sequence, right?
Almost a million. Yeah, it's 7. Yeah, okay.
So that's base, right? As an example, let's look at the big spike right here. Yeah, there you go. Right
there. Look at that.
Guess what? Base is on fire. They're tweeting like mad. Like, why? Because it's a great business for them all of a sudden, right? This is these blobs have created that. But look at this the other way, right? $30,000 a day in L1 fees.
Fees have gone way down.
It's $11 million a year, though. That's
okay.
Real
it's still expensive.
Yeah. So, anyways, this dashboard I like a lot because it starts to really sort of get to these economic forces at play and why we see some of the behavior that we see. And look, you can see these margins right down here. We hit Cancun and their margins go super high. Right. And so anyways, this is what some of the reasons that we think this stuff is super fascinating. We're still pretty early in this journey, but it is worth noting, certainly yesterday, there was like 6,000% blob contention. Right. And so each one of these L2s, if they're going to maintain their momentum, are going to need fallback strategies, going to need to do real-time decisioning, going to need probably to create relationships where they can submit blobs privately if they need to. Right. There's all sorts of tips and techniques and tricks that can be used to optimize, one, your ability to get on chain, and two, the price that you do that with. And so we're the introduction discount period is over, and now it's a real marketplace. Everybody thought that would happen. I think it happened a little suddenly, and I think it was pretty breathtaking to watch. It was super fun yesterday. It was a crazy day for us. But now I think this is probably the new normal until some other thing comes along to disrupt this new normal.
And there are plans to scale all of these different things we've been talking about. Base will have to scale their stuff somehow. The blobs will scale in how we can add more blobs on chain. Is that right? I basically read this stuff from like Vitalik's blog or something. I don't know it very well, but all of these different bottlenecks, other than maybe L1, and even L1 is probably going to find cheaper ways to do this, but there are scaling strategies for each of these different bottlenecks we've mentioned, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so, this is one of the things about the nature of technology. If anything's too big, too slow, or too expensive, just add time, right? And so, and this is very true. It's true of phones. It's true of chains as well. So, Cancun was the 0 to 1 moment. We went from not having blobs to having blobs, right? But the initial introduction is proto-dank sharding, and it's pretty limited, just 6 blobs. They're 128 kilobytes, right? It's pretty small. These are basically constraints which can be changed over time. We can add more blobs per block. We can make the blobs bigger. We can do more things. So there is a whole roadmap to basically expand blob space, to increase the gas fee, to increase throughput, right? There is radical, innovation happening in the L2 space and now the L3 space. And so we're at the beginning of the geometric increases in scalability. But remember that everybody wants free transactions. And as soon as you have free transactions, you have new sources of demand, including spam that rush into fill, right? And so there will be no free lunch. There will just be, more possibility, more space, also more complexity, more ways for things to go wrong, more things for folks to consider. Because at the end of the day, if it's free most of the time, except when things get really hectic and then you can't do anything and all your things you're trying to defend you can't, then people basically lose confidence in the stability and reliability of the system. And so this is a lot of the work that we do at Block Native, is helping people observe what's going on so they can basically build and plan for the future, and basically building systems that can account for some of these extreme conditions that do and will emerge on the network as we go forward.
I like the idea of defending your positions on chain. I imagine this whole like war going on with these LP positions and things. Like, I don't understand any of that, but it sounds awesome. Like, I want to build autonomous worlds where you are defending your position on chain in a different way. But this is
Right.
like financially dependent, like defending your LP positions from getting like liquidated and things like that, right?
With
It's great.
serious financial incentives on both
Yep.
sides.
With
And
exactly.
and latency games, basically whoever gets there first, basically wins. And so there are games within games that occur, and there's real economic advantage to those who have an edge here, right? I think one of the things that's super important is a level playing field, because without a level playing field, you wind up with haves and have-nots. You end up with a two-lane system. To a certain extent, that kind of exists today on Ethereum, and I think there's a lot of efforts going in to try to balance things out as much as possible. But that's what makes this a super interesting, the grand experiment of Ethereum, and why it's so fun to be a part of, because it's all live, it's all real, and there's real consequences to everything going on.
I think an interesting thing to talk about is why we wouldn't scale blocks up right away. And I think we should talk about the decentralization of the network and how hard it is to run a node currently. I've got a node running here, and it's got like a 4 terabyte hard drive in it, and it's got a bunch of cores, and it's got a bunch of memory, and it takes it a while to sync. But as we're moving toward L2s and 4844, there's also stuff happening where we're getting rid of self-destruct, and we're moving toward having Verkle trees, which will make it easier to run a light node and a light client. And so all of these decisions of, yes, we could just scale this thing up, but that makes it harder for the node runners, and therefore makes the network less decentralized, right? We want a very decentralized network. We want it easy for people to run nodes. So all of these decisions that we're making, just like you're saying, there's a financial game here, and there's people on both sides and supply and demand. There's definitely a technical game being played here in terms of how we decentralize our blockchain, and how decentralized it is, and how each one of these decisions kind of changes that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I said before, just add time, right? And so if you're a solo staker and you add time, what do you have?
Oh, we lost you again. You've earned fees. I know that.
Massive gains. You have massive gains. Massive. Okay. The gains are on the value of your ETH has gone up significantly, and you have your APY, your earnings, right? And so, hey, that's awesome, right? Amazing. Now, is it reasonable to say, you know what, you're going to need to invest in order to continue to get returns, right? I don't think that's unreasonable. And so the basic question is sort of, what is the reasonableness threshold? If the network continues to perform on behalf of the people who are receiving economic benefit for it, what are the expectations the network can have on those folks, right? Like, hey, I used my 1992 compact laptop running Windows, 93. Sorry, that's not really a thing. Windows 95. And like, is there an expectation or guarantee that forever I'm going to be able to do that and continue to have massive appreciation of my underlying assets, right? I mean, that's reasonable. And so I guess the interesting question is, one, how can we be more efficient? How can we, continue to maintain that things are reasonably accessible to an individual staker, but also not be, stuck in the past, which is we freeze time as it relates to the hardware necessary, and therefore that puts all sorts of artificial constraints on the scalability of the network. And I think there's no right or wrong answer here, but I think it's a pretty reasonable debate to have, which is, if you're a solo staker, you've done really well. That's great, right? That's exactly the idea. And hey, let's invest moving forward. There's no guarantee that you'll continue to do really well moving forward. But again, if you're not benefiting economically, then most people aren't going to be staking. And so there's kind of this understanding and agreement there, implicit, that's made. And so, I'm reasonably confident that we can make a logical argument to increase some of the minimum demands and say it's in everybody's best interest to do so. At the end of the day, it's all about economic incentives. And so, there we go. We also have this problem where there's too much ETH staked, and there's this scenario where all the ETH is staked and there's no ETH available. And so there's some really interesting work that's being done by guys like Onchain and Caspar to try to figure out what the right schedule is for this stuff. So, I think we're still in the middle of that journey as well. Um, Everyone I know who stakes, it's more about the software than it is about the hardware. I mean, certainly the hardware is a consideration, but that's not the massive headache. The massive headache is it's just finicky, right? And so if we really want more people to do this, I would say we worry a lot more about making it less finicky, much more appliance-based, much more, all-in-one. And if you could say
single command, you run it like DAP node style. You just like go on and say, I want to stake. And it's like, hey, this is the CL-EL pair that is the least common right now. We'll incentivize you to pick that one up, and you hit okay. And then it just starts spinning them up and letting you know. And if one of them dies somehow, it like brings it back up. Every once in a while, my ref node is just like, nope. But yeah, something to bring that back up and sync it back up. Some single line with some incentives, even maybe. Yeah. But there's also ethos. This is very ethos driven too. Sorry to interrupt you some more there. But there's a lot of folks that are really into the ethos of decentralization. And this is a really good way to get your hands dirty. Like running a validator is a great way to be part of decentralization, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, the ethos is AI is really happening. Do you run an LLM on your laptop, or do you use ChatGPT, right? Like, I don't know. It feels like a spectrum to me. I agree. We want to encourage decentralization of the network, largely, one, I think it's part of who we are. We're a hobbyist, participatory community, but also because the opposite of that is massive centralization of stake, and that creates all sorts of really negative externalities on the network. So in general, I think incentivizing and encouraging solo staking is important, but it's a trade-off. And again, would you spend $500 to make 1,000? Would you spend 1,000 to make 2,000? Like would you spend 5,000 to make 50,000? Like, these are all positive ROI arguments. And I think saying, oh, we have to fix the first number at $500, right, forever isn't totally reasonable. And also, the nature of technology is $500 of hardware 5 years ago is a lot less capable than $500 of hardware today, right? So the bummer of it all, the headache is I got to swap out hardware, right?
Yeah.
To do that. But again, if you're like, well, I've made $50,000, $60,000, $100,000, right? And saying in order to keep participating, I have to invest 500 doesn't seem unreasonable to me. And so anyways, this is why I'm generally in favor of a more progressive strategy of increasing block size and, leveraging throughput more. I think there are some really interesting problems too, as a self-staker, as to, network connectivity and uptime and latency. And those are trickier. It's one thing to say, buy a different piece of hardware. It's another thing to say, upgrade your internet connection.
Have better internet. Yeah.
That may be out of reach for some folks. It'd be interesting to say, well, we want to make sure that you can be a positive actor on the network over something like Starlink, which is arguably available anywhere in the world. You could be on a sailboat in the middle of the Pacific and you could participate just like someone, outside of a major city. That would be kind of interesting to see. And there's no doubt, by the way, that the advent of blob space significantly increases network demand, meaning there's more bandwidth being consumed. That, by the way, bandwidth equals latency, which now starts to create other complexities. And I think that's part of what we were seeing yesterday with missed slots was there's so much blob traffic that there were some network congestion issues that were affecting the MEV boost builder market and relay market. It's not totally clear, exactly what's happened there. But, the net of all of this for everybody else is it feels a little like magic, but underneath the covers, there's a lot of moving parts, and there is never ever a free lunch. There's never something for nothing, right? There's only trade-offs to be made, and sometimes those trade-offs involve being more technically efficient, and other times trade-off involves new hardware specifications that are required. And so I tend to be pragmatic on these sorts of things, and I hope everybody else is pragmatic as well.
I think let's think about this as some very intelligent people have made decisions that has led us to this point where now we have fast, cheap L2 transactions that are, now pennies or fractions of pennies. And for the first time, all of these decisions coming together are allowing, and we saw that if we could go back to the Dune dashboard, we saw as soon as those prices went down, the usage went way up. And you were talking about arbitrage bots, and I think sure they're probably. And you're the man in the mempool. You know what's really going on here. I'm sure there are lots of arbitrage bots, but there's also just a lot of humans that want to use this. They want to use smart contract apps. They want to experience decentralization. They want to ape into some degen token. And to do that, like, that's what people are doing here on chain. It's not just arbitrage bots. These are a bunch of humans that are also like wanting to participate in this network, and they've been priced out until we've made a bunch of these technical decisions to figure out how to get them on chain at a reasonable price. And that's happening now. And I think that's just really exciting.
It's super exciting. It opens up whole new classes of applications. And by the way, to your point on these L2s, they have two super huge advantages. One, lower fees. Two, faster confirmation, right? And so you wind up with, sort of L2 summer where you have this explosion of innovation, and you can now do, experiences that don't make sense for 12-second block times suddenly make sense where you have, sub-second confirmations or pre-confirmations as well. Things that don't make sense at $3 transactions do make sense at, fraction of a cent transactions. I'm sure you're familiar with, but there's this big rise of these Telegram trading bots, which have their own sort of, pros and cons. But anyone,
the custody model's a little bad, right? Like,
exactly,
basically you're letting them custody your funds, and you're just like YOLOing Telegram commands. Yeah,
you're making, you're certainly making trade-offs associated with it, but like, you literally can just, type in and you can be moving tokens around and participating in meme coining. Now it's pretty much gambling, but it's like gambling at low. You can gamble for a few bucks. You can move in and out of positions really quickly. It's a few cents to do so, and you're like, oh, I kind of get this. This is kind of fun, and like, oh wow, it's very different and very immersive to those folks who get into that kind of thing. It's just an example, I think, of the class of experience which is coming, which is when you combine consumer grade experience like a chatbot with fast transaction times and low fees, so it's accessible, with true ownership, i.e. it's crypto and on chain. A million things can happen from there. An unlimited number of things can happen from there, and it's super fun.
There's an angle here about account abstraction that I think you've been talking a lot about too. We're on these L2s now that it's cheap, now that you have access. This Telegram bot is kind of a cheat because the Telegram bot is technically in control of all of everyone's money and making the decisions. And we want to move you to like a self-custody system where it's you controlling the thing and no one can take it from you. And that's been traditionally hard with EOAs, but we're moving into this new smart contract paradigm where you're using a smart contract as a wallet. And that kind of gets rid of some of these elephants in the room about, if you lose your seed phrase, it's gone forever. If you leak your seed phrase, it's swept immediately. Both of those things, first of all, are improved greatly with smart contract wallets with things like social recovery. But also there's this new like UX that's coming here where this is kind of unknown to me what the UX is going to be exactly. Right now you can kind of use a Gnosis safe and you can iframe in Uniswap and you can swap, but you can't really batch your approve and swap transactions. So there's definitely some unknown territory in terms of, yes, this is the Wild West and we're doing all this new stuff, but we really haven't even seen great account abstraction in practice with smart contract wallets yet. And that's coming. And that in combination with all this other stuff is going to mean, huge spikes in users.
I totally agree. We have been fairly active in the land of 4337, which is sort of the first big move towards account abstraction. One of the big challenges of 4337 is it's more expensive to use than a typical transaction, but hocus pocus, you move this to L2s, you move this to blob space, and now suddenly it's, this version of free or that version of free. I mean, which fractions of a penny do you worry about? So yeah, we do think there's a lot of possibilities coming. And again, we don't need to imagine. We can start to see, some of that. Again, these Telegram bots are super interesting, and they do a few things. Now, I'll be very clear, right? The custody model is not great, right? But once you get over that, which
the UX is great though.
Yeah, but they do another thing which is not really well understood, which is they batch transactions together and they can get better execution. And so, hey, if I'm just on my own, I'm a little individual and I'm up against these massive trading houses, they basically, I get MEV'd, I get, pushed down. I basically I suffer less favorable settlement, right? I get a less favorable trade. But because I'm part of this broader collective, I actually it's like I'm part of this large army, and I can get much better terms as a result of that. And so this is also possible in the world of account abstraction. So on our journey towards, full self custody that's genuinely usable, I think we're starting to see some of these UI patterns and UX patterns begin to emerge. There's a project out there that's, ZK proofs of your biometric passport so that you can provably state your citizenship without giving away all your other information, right? Or
I just learned that passports have RSA signatures in them. The United States government has signed your passport, and it has a signature that you can prove using RSA crypto that they signed your passport. I just learned about that from Ayush that's doing ZK email. What a cool thing that the government is doing all that cool stuff. Like, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes we don't give them enough credit sometimes, because we feel like we're in the Wild West and there's a lot of ambiguity and we could use some more help. But when I learned that, I was like, oh, that's such a good thing. That's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a new primitive that we can leverage and play with, and folks are beginning to do so. And so we start to look forward to a very different future that is much more on the side of the individual and on the side of individual control and on the side of sort of economic and individual freedom, which we're all, sort of part of. So anyways, these are all baby steps along the way. But, I think one of the things that we learned out of Dan Kuhn is, yet again, Ethereum can ship, right? It's a pretty, it's securing, on the order of $1 trillion of economic activity, and we upgraded in flight. And it's sort of almost boring and sort of how uneventful it is. And sometimes we can take that for granted. It is incredibly impressive. And I think that the stewardship that the EF has demonstrated has been pretty remarkable. It's not easy. It's not perfect. There's always trade-offs to be made. And, I would not bet again, we continue to bet on future upgrades. Ethereum is a constantly evolving and constantly innovating, and that's kind of the bet. And whatever your issue with Ethereum is right now, just add time, right? It's going to get easier to use, going to get faster, going to get cheaper, it's going to get clearer, right? And there's still a lot of things we got to make better, but it's, well on its way. So anyways, it's super fun to be a part of, and we're happy to play a role in all of it. And do encourage everybody else out there, again, to check out the resources that are available, to dive in, start asking questions. You and I are both super accessible on Twitter. It's fun. It's great. So anyways, that's my POV on all this stuff.
Ethernow.xyz is I've always wanted something that would say what is happening on Ethereum right now. This is close, and I think it's still, I have to parse some of this. I almost want like GPT to give me a one-liner after seeing all of these things, right? As you're looking at this, your brain is doing some things that my brain is not, and I wish I could encapsulate that into a one line of like what actually is happening, even though there is a lot of stuff here. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's fun. We ask this question a lot. So, we built this in part because like there was really no place to go to answer that question.
And then Etherscan was the best, right? And that's so hard to tell what's really going on. Like you see gas burned in Etherscan, sort of. Yeah.
Etherscan and many of the block explorers are great, but they're backward. They tell you what happened. They're not telling you what's happening. So basically here, what we're doing is we're focused on what's the last block, what's going on in the last block, and what's in the public mempool right now. And so at the top, you have, this last block data, but then this information is what's in the mempool. And like, this is really interesting. So what is the current value of in-flight ETH transfers denominated in dollars versus the stablecoin transfer value also denominated in dollars? So this is literally value in motion of these two classes of assets: ETH as an asset, stablecoins as an asset. And
you see build up as the block gets toward the end of the block. We see the last little, like a big push, right? Is that what's going on? Yeah.
Yeah. So you see the sawtooth function when a new block is confirmed. And so basically a bunch of the thing that's pending goes on chain, right? So it builds up and then goes down. And pretty much 100% of the people who we show it to, including, some of the leading researchers that are out there, are like, wow, it's a really interesting way to think about the net.
Oh, we lost you there. We lost sound. I don't know. It's only happened like 2 or 3 times, so it's fine. I don't know why. Yeah.
Literally, it's a cable issue.
We got
I have a new setup here. I'm sorry about that. So
all good.
It's this way to think about the network as, value in motion, but not in terms of sort of the abstract. It's in the actual.
You can kind of feel it. Yeah, you can see it kind of boom, boom. Yeah, you can
Exactly.
see it pop up as the block is about finalized or ready to get validated, I guess. You see it fill up and the last little bits of move. Yeah. And it looks like more stable coin volume, almost like an order of magnitude more stable coin volume happening.
It
And, okay,
changes.
so now I'm starting to see this intuitively. This is what you
Exactly.
want. Yeah.
Now, what's fascinating is try this with your favorite TradFi network.
Right.
Let's see what composes that. Oh, I got to click down here. So I can click, and now I can see the actual transactions that comprise this, right? So this is this thing about observability is Ethereum as a network is more transparent by orders of magnitude than anything that has come before it, right? You can actually see all of the details. So by the way, like here is a USDC transaction for just about $25,000. It's pending right now. We'll see if it's properly gas. But hands up here, we can watch as it goes just right there
Yep.
from pending to confirmed, right? We can see its journey, sort of when it entered and when it was confirmed. We can see all the details about it. And if we want, we can actually get into the JSON itself of the transaction. And this is transacting on Ethereum, right? It's part of this whole process. And so this degree of observability, basically, we think is really fundamental to everyone understanding it's a fair network, to institutional investors understanding they're getting good settlement, to regulators saying, oh, well, we can see what's going on here, and we have some sense of right and wrong. We have forensic analysis enabled by this as well. So anyways, these are just some of the things that we think are super fascinating about looking at what's going on right now. So there's this other phenomena down here of private transactions. We're generally the source of this information for the ecosystem. So private transactions are transactions that go straight on chain. They don't transit the public mempool. And again, we can then click
I think of
through.
Flashbots. You go to Flashbots and they set up a bundle for you. You make a bunch of transactions, maybe sweeping an old account that you accidentally leaked or something, and there's an NFT on it. You fund the account, you sweep the money out, and then you get the money out. How can you be the viewer of the private stuff? How does that work? How do you measure private stuff if it never is it because you're watching the mempool and then you see something go on chain and now it's on chain and we never saw it in the mempool, so it must have been private. Okay, cool.
Exactly. And so we operate a global network that has custom peering relation, has a lot of global infrastructure to try to get as close to 100% coverage as possible of the peer-to-peer layer. And we're pretty darn close to that. We're about as close as you can get. And so if we haven't seen the transaction and it shows up on chain, then we say, ooh, we'll label that as private. And again, there can be misses generally there might have been a non-private transaction that did something strange. But so here, I'm just looking at a block. This is block number 063, right? It was built by a builder called rsync. So this is really critical. In order to do private transactions, you have to transmit them directly to the builder, who then includes it in the block without the public mempool. And you can see, by the way, we talked about Telegram bots. So this is the banana gun router. And we can see its journey goes to confirmed. It was never detected as pending, right? So that is the definition of a private transaction, right? Whereas if we, I'll just go back to here. This is, I still have a filter applied. Hold on. I'm just going to turn this off and apply that and close that. And so now we see everything. And so we'll just go into a block here and we can see this journey pending to confirmed, right? We can see this journey pending to confirmed. By the way, you can also see journeys that are much more complex than that, blocked by nonce, replaced, canceled. And so there's a lot of interesting transactions that have non-traditional.
Cancel. I feel like I learned how to cancel a transaction from you a few years ago. I assumed that canceling a transaction was some kind of, you cancel the transaction somehow, you sign a thing that says you cancel it, but you don't. You basically bring up a new transaction with the same exact nonce that does nothing, and you just have higher gas. And so it's just you're racing your other transaction, and you just put a faster one out ahead of it. So then it takes over the nonce and then cancels effectively the other transaction.
Exactly. So here's an example of a crazy transaction journey. Okay. So this is a single transaction that was sped up a whole number of times, right? And then multiple cancels.
Probably by a bot. There's some bot that's doing some like step function of increasing the gas, trying to cheaply get it in or something.
Yeah, or there was some problem. I mean, you know, there's many reasons. Yeah, and so the one of the things we like to say is, you know, there's the theory of how things work, and then there's the reality of how things work. And the reality is often quite a bit different than what you might expect. And so this is why it's so important to observe what's going on, and really critical for developers who are like, wait, why is my application behaving this way? Why did this transaction go? Why is my bot doing these things? That these sorts of tools and this sort of data can really help you go, oh, here's why it did what it did, why that was a problem, and how I can correct that or prevent that moving forward. And so this notion of observability, by the way, you know, came out of the Web 2 world, where you had these big cloud applications that had all these different parts, you know, maybe across different hosting providers with different subsystems. And like, you had these very complex cloud applications with all these interdependencies, and then it would get slow. And you'd sort of say, well, why is it slow? And you're like, well, maybe it's an AWS issue. Maybe it's a GCP issue. Maybe it's a one of my cloud software providers. Maybe it's Salesforce. Maybe it's something else, because they're all wound together. And so what you do is implement observability to understand the inner state of all of these systems in real time, so you could figure out what was going on. Well, now just think about the transition from Web 2 to Web 3, that now we have vastly more observability challenges because you have all of these different layers of the stack that are interacting.
And these things aren't mutually exclusive. We need all of the good stuff of Web 2 to be able to make Web 3 work.
Exactly. And so, you know, why is my chain behaving the way that it is? Why is the L2 happen? Why is a batch not able to post? Why is fees doing what's going on? Why is this taking so long, right? These are all observability challenges. And so this is why we think this is sort of a fun and interesting area to be in, and why we encourage people to start to go hands-on. And like this, by the way, is made possible by a grant from the EF itself, which we're really thankful for. And the intent is that it is therefore free to use for end users and most developers, because we want to encourage adoption of it, right? And so, you know, we do very much, you know, we're trying to operate this as a public good, as funded by the organizations that we work with, and we work with the EF and Optimism and Arbitrum and Matter Lab, ZK Sync, and a whole bunch of others. So if you're a foundation out there and you'd like these sort of capabilities for your ecosystem, we'd love to talk with you about that as well. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the takeaway is what's happening on chain. There's some knuckleheads putting inscriptions on the blobs right now because blobs are cheap. But if you push on those blobs too hard, it's going to get super expensive. But just the fact that they're finally pushing on it means that blobs are no longer free. And instead of one way, we see four gwei. And that kind of seems like a natural resting point, or you know, yeah, you're right. It could go all over the place, but it's not going to be one way. It's going to get usage. And I think that's kind of the key takeaway here. And it's going to get usage by a new class of users that were traditionally priced out, that are now ready, and they have access, and they have a Coinbase wallet, and AA is happening, and a lot of other cool things on L2. So very exciting times. It's good to see all this stuff happening on chain.
Awesome. Yeah, we couldn't agree more, and happy to share our POV on this. And you can follow us at Block Native. You can follow me at Cutler. And Austin, always great to connect. We've known each other for a long time now, and appreciate you having me on to share about this stuff, and happy to talk about it anytime in the future. Okay.
Let's do it next time something weird happens. Like next time something really goofy is happening on chain, just ping me and let's go live and talk about it. How's that sound?
Sounds awesome. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Go check out Block Native. Go check out ethernow.xyz and figure out what's going on Ethereum right now. Thank you, Matt.